gente sabe que educação se dá na presença. E de uma hora para outra, esse lugar tão especial do aprendizado teve que mudar. Em tempos de mudança, é muito importante lembrar que estamos juntos. Agora, a empatia e a colaboração são ainda mais importantes para a gente seguir construindo futuros mais brilhantes. É sobre isso o Cambridge Day 2020. Colaboração em tempos de mudança. Nosso evento sempre foi um momento de encontro, celebração e aprendizado. Esse ano seguiremos juntos, ao vivo, com palestrantes do mundo todo, cada um na sua própria casa. Então nós temos um encontro marcado dos dias 20 a 24 de julho. Inscreva-se em cambridgeday.org.br. Vem com a gente construir mais um Cambridge Day.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. How are you today? We are halfway of our 5 days together learning from renowned speakers how to support and develop students' language from home. My name is Renata Simões, your host. Hope everybody is ready for Cambridge Day 2020. Before I start, I have a few reminders. A lot of you guys are asking on the chat about how to see the webinars on video. They are all going to be available for viewing on Cambridge University Press YouTube. And how can I say? On next Monday, on 27th of July. I also read on a chat a few people asking about the link of each speaker. And I have to remind you that please check your spam box, because when you register, we send it by email to you guys. Sometimes you guys didn't receive it because it goes to the spam box, so please be sure to check your spam box. And if you have already registered and the problem is not getting the link remains, please, our amazing support team will be glad to help you. Just email them on atendimento.br@cambridge.org. Okay, so now we're starting Cambridge Day 2020. Today, we are going to learn about teaching new skills to our students, and we hope you enjoy it as much as I'm doing. We are broadcasting this event for the Latin American ELT community, and together we are building a brighter future for us and our students. If you attend our ELT specific session, you will be entitled to receive a certificate of attendance from your professional development. Don't forget to answer our survey about your experience here with us by the end of each session. And time for our first speaker. He was born in a country that is well known for its amazing landscape, New Zealand. He now lives in Spain. He's the author of several award-winning books for teachers on language and methodology. Please welcome Scott Thornbury. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Renata. Hi, everybody.
Oh, nice to have you here. Just a pleasure and an honor. I think that everybody, I see people from Argentina, from Brazil, a lot of people. There is someone from Pakistan. Oh my God!
Wow!
I'm getting excited. I know that you're pretty used to this kind of conversations, right? How is your relation with online teaching and online chatting?
Well, I've been doing it actually for a long time. I've been teaching on an online master's program for 12, 13, 14 years now. So I've been doing teacher training online. I'm not familiar so much with teaching online, but also, of course, in the last few months, I've been doing lots of webinars. I was meant to be in Brazil last week, actually, for Braz TESOL, but
exactly
with one thing and the other. Here I am online again.
but you came here last year, right, Scott?
Oh, was it last year? It's a bit longer than that. I can't remember. It was 2 or 3 years ago, Renata. It was for the Braz TESOL.
Yeah. Well, welcome again, even in an online world. And before you say your favorite language cheating methods, which is the theme of your webinar, please tell us a little bit of your memories you hold still from Latin America.
Oh, well, I mean, I've been coming backwards and forwards to Latin America since 1995, I think. So I've got a great affection for the region, and I hope it's reciprocal. I know I've got a lot of friends there. I've done a lot of talks, conferences, and a lot of online webinars and sessions. In fact, I've got another one next week. So I feel very much at home, even though, of course, here it's 7 p.m. In Spain, but I'm with you in Latin America and wherever you are in the world, whoever, from Pakistan all the way through. I've seen Mexico, I've seen Argentina. It's fantastic. Some people are staying up really late for this. I'm really impressed. So I'm looking forward to it.
Be welcome and enjoy your webinar. Thank you, Scott Thornbury.
Thank you, Renata. Thank you. Well, as I say, everybody, it's great to be here. I've got one eye on the clock, one eye on the chat, and I've only got 2 eyes. So I hope to be able to deal with questions at the end. I'm going to try and get through this in about 45 minutes, and that'll give us 10-15 minutes for your questions. So my topic is methods, obviously, and I'm going to start, before I get into the kind of content, by asking you, I'm going to show you some from pictures. And I want you just to identify the method that is represented in each of the photos that I show you. Are you ready? So all you have to do is write what you think is the answer into the chat, and I'll see if I can catch it as it flies by. So this is picture number 1. What method is that? Renata, I think, is first. Renata da Silva is first off the block. Yep, there it comes. Audiolingual. Yes, absolutely. Audiolingualism, or the audiolingual method, or whatever you want to call it. So that's the kind of iconic technology that's associated with audiolingualism, the language laboratory. Those of you who are old enough to remember long hours in the language laboratory, either as a student or as a teacher. So that was very much, as I say, the kind of technology associated with the idea of pattern practice drills. Drill, practice. Doesn't matter if you're not interacting. That wasn't important. It was to get it was to reinforce those habits, those drills. So yes, B.F. Skinner says, Louis, exactly. Okay, here's number 2. Picture number 2, you ready? And I'll read you the caption if you can't see. The boys and the adult model jumped when they heard the command, Tobe. Okay, I'm waiting for the... Okay, here we go. Jacqueline, I think, is first. Polly, you're right. Camilla, yes. I love this photo. It was from one of the original articles that James Asher wrote to publicize this method way back in the 1970s, I think. And you're absolutely right. TPR standing for total physical response. So teacher jump, says jump, students jump, say jump, etc. Yeah. Okay, pretty good. Okay, here's number 3. You need to look closely here. I'm rather proud of this photo. I took it myself. So you should be able to see that the learners are, in this case, are interacting. They have pictures on a worksheet, and they're communicating between each other. And Michelle, I think you're the first. And then Aida, communicative approach. Yes, I mean, I think this captures the essence of a communicative approach. We've got the classic information gap activity. So There's a worksheet, there's pictures of different faces on it. One student's describing a face to her partner, and who has to guess which one, listen and guess which one. So the real information gap, real communication going on here. So I would say that's, again, a kind of emblematic activity associated with what we now know as the communicative approach. Okay, you're doing great. Here's number 4. This one, not so easy. I'll tell you what, if you concentrate, look how comfortable the students are. And even the teacher hasn't got shoes on. I'll give you a clue. This is one of these kind of fringe methodologies associated with, Carolina, well done, with humanistic. Amanda's in there too. The humanistic approaches. So we have various, and this is the one that's called, as you correctly guessed, or knew, Suggestopedia, developed by Lozanov in Bulgaria in the 1960s, 70s. So the students are listening to a dialogue, that beautiful, calm music playing in the background. They're totally relaxed. They're almost in a kind of hypnotic state, and they're hearing the dialogue in 2 languages, and they're kind of, it's penetrating every part of their brain. So that's Suggestopedia. And one more for good measure. If you can see what's going on here, you'll see that it's basically the students doing things, not much teacher presence. And Amanda, I think, is the first one to get it right. Okay, here it's coming in. Moira, yep. Renata, again, Stella, Erica, Sylvia. Task-based learning, TBL, task-based language teaching, task-based learning. What do you want to go? Task-based, or PBL, Luciana's project-based learning, activity-based learning, whatever you want to do. Students are doing a project, they're doing a task, they're using the target language to mediate the interaction. So yeah, brilliant. Okay, so those are just 5 methods from my collection, and there's many more, and that's what I want to focus on. So a tiny little bit of background here before we get into my favorite methods. What is a method? I mean, what is the definition? Well, I'm going to use this one, David Noonan's, as good as any. He said that a language teaching method is a single set of procedures which teachers are to follow in the classroom. Methods are usually based on a set of beliefs about the nature of language and the nature of learning, a single set of procedures. So that's what audiolingualism was, a single set of procedures. It was classroom drills. It was the language laboratory. It was based on a set of beliefs, which included the belief that language learning was a habit formation process, and the nature of language, that it was syntactic patterns. And so that is that's where we were with audiolingualism. You can apply the same template to any other method theoretically. However, the idea of method, kind of, as we well know, started going out of fashion actually way at the end of last century. H.H. Stern said in 1983, he said several developments indicate a shift in language pedagogy away from the single method concept as the main approach to language teaching. In other words, there's not a single method. Why? Well, because already in the 1980s, English and languages, second languages, were being taught in a whole range of contexts globally to a range of learners, adults, young learners, teens, university, business people, etc. So no single method, by a whole range of teachers too. So no single method fit all these different kinds of contexts. But also there's a feeling that it was a kind of a top-down, imposed from the center out kind of thing. These methods were always developed, apart from one or two, were developed in the kind of the center, the so-called center, like Britain, States, and so on. And they kind of were exported to places where they possibly didn't have those beliefs about language and particularly about learning. So there was this kind of, I don't know about this method thing. And there was a shift towards what was called let's just see if we can get this, to what we know as the, what's this slide? Okay. They're not getting it. Here it comes. What is the missing slide? Okay. Okay. There we go. The idea that that there was a dissatisfaction with method led people like Kumar Amadivalu to suggest that we're in the post-method condition. We're in the post-method situation. That was in 1994. In fact, in 1991, Dick Allwright wrote a paper, an article called "The Death of Method." So there's very much the idea that the notion of method had been kind of superannuated. It was kind of finished. We'd moved beyond that. But of course, if you go online and you key in language method or language teaching method, you find hundreds of references to method. Here I've got a few I've just taken randomly from the internet. Developed and used over years in the classroom, I've skipped the name, the XX method has shown phenomenal success. So this is people promoting their own particular methods, and they're calling them methods unashamedly. Here's another one. Our approach, the blah, blah, blah method, is based on research about how the brain functions and how best to take advantage of it. And here's another one. Method. So the idea that people are still talking about methods. And in fact, one researcher in 2007 did a survey of teachers all around the world and found that very much they were invested in the notion of method. He commented, he summarized, he said the term is not dead. Teachers seem to be aware of both the usefulness of methods and the need to go beyond them. And we'll be talking about going beyond them in a second. So in a sense, we've seemed to be going round and round. First of all, there were methods, and then there was, no one method because of all the different contexts. And now then when there was Kumar Abhidhamma, there was post method. And then there's Dick Allwright saying no method. And then there's methods on the internet, etc. So where are we? And I think the method idea hasn't gone away for a lot of teachers, a lot of teacher trainers too. And one of the reasons why is, as Jack Richards and Ted Rogers say in that best-selling book about, which you'll be familiar with if you've done a course in methodology. And what they're saying is methods can be studied not as prescriptions for how, but as a source of well-used practices, which teachers can adapt or implement based on their own needs. A source of well-used practices. The methods can supply sort of ideas, templates, whatever, for teaching. And this is especially true for novice teachers, for new teachers who are plunged into teaching for the first time, and they need something to kind of hang their lessons on. So that's, in a sense, where I'm at. And of course, it's not surprising that still lots of books are being published about methods. Here's this lovely one I was given in Russia 2 years ago. Anybody here from Russia? You might be familiar with this if you've done a teacher training course. But there are many others that have come up over the years. Every 5 years sees a new one with method in the title or not. And this is a great one. Diane Larson Freeman's been several editions. And of course, the Richards and Rogers that I just referred to, published by Cambridge University Press. And here's another one by, oh my God, this is one, of course, that I wrote a couple of years ago. And it's from this book that I want to share 7 of my methods that I investigated that I find rather interesting for all sorts of different reasons. So let's have a look at these 7 favorite methods. And they go back in time. This is the first one. I love this. Nobody knows about this much, except geeks like me. Prendergast's mastery system. This is Prendergast. He was a civil servant in India in the 19th century. He learnt some local languages like Hindustani. And from that experience of being a student, he developed a kind of method. And it was called the mastery system, and he wrote it up, and it was published, and it became very popular in its time for teaching a number of languages, not just English, but German and French, etc. That's the cover of his book. And this is one of his, he had a very well-developed philosophy about learning how to learn a language. And he was committed to the idea that you don't learn a language by learning its grammar. You learn it by being immersed in its kind of patterns. So he said the power of speaking other tongues idiomatically is attained principally by efforts of the memory, not by logical reasonings. That is to say, not by sitting down and learning all the grammar rules necessary. It's all about memory. And so how did he do it? Well, he had this system whereby he had these sentences, these key sentences. And these are a couple from the book. And so these are sentences based on the commonest, what he called the commonest words in English. So sentence number 1, I'll read it to you. You can't see it. Why did you not ask him to come with 2 or 3 of his friends to see my brother's gardens? Yeah, pretty common words, etc. Now, he would take those sentences and he would basically explode them. So I'm not expecting you to see this, but I can't fit this onto a screen. But this is a diagram from his book, and it shows you how it works. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, there are 2 sentences here. His servant saw your friend's new bag near our house. Her cousin found my sister's little book in their carriage. Okay, each word is numbered, and then below what you see is thousands of different combinations of those numbers. So let's take any combination of those numbers and we'll get a sentence. So for example, here is, if we take randomly from that list, words 9, 12, 3, 9, 15, 6, 17, we get this sentence. Our cousin saw our sister's new book. You see what he's doing? So he's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. He's playing around with all the possible combinations. Now, the idea was that the learners should memorize these sentences and then do what he called ring the changes, do all these different combinations. And does that sound familiar to anybody? I mean, it's not a million miles away from this kind of thing. Do you remember this? This was very much, again, when I was learning to teach, and it's associated with the language laboratory and pattern practice drills, but it's the famous substitution table. So what you have at the bottom there, 1, 2, 3, 4, you've got the 4 columns with the different substitutions for the question, how does one get there? How do you manage to do that? How do people get tickets, etc.? So all the different possible combinations that can be generated from that table. That's like, there's something about that I find attractive and useful as a language learner. And of course, I'm not alone. If you're familiar with the online app Duolingo, you'll know that this is basically how they teach languages. It's all about playing around with different combinations of words that fit into a syntax. So these are taken from different languages. This is Gaelic. The musician played the fiddle, but he died. That's not great, not a very authentic sentence, but who cares? Good morning, spider. Goodbye, fly. Practicing German. Or it does be snowing in the month of January. I'm not sure about that being correct. They say it's correct. But anyway, the eggplant is not a purple banana. Useful sentence? Probably not, but it's a way of manipulating all the different elements of the sentence. And my favorite, the hamster talks Romanian. I mean, I love to think of a context where somebody would say that the hamster talks Romanian. But there you go. But now this is incredibly popular. I'm not trying to sell Duolingo, but it is very popular, not just because it's free, that people like just playing around with these patterns. So maybe Prendergast had something. He also said, incidentally, when a child can employ 200 words of a foreign language, just 200, he possesses a practical knowledge of all the syntactical constructions and of all the foreign sounds. So what he was saying is that those core words, those most common words, give you access to the phonology of the language, but also the syntax that's associated with those common words. This was in 1864. And it took another 100 years before Professor John Sinclair at the University of Birmingham to say the same thing, in a sense. Learners would do well to learn the common words of the language very thoroughly because they carry the main patterns of the language, the common words of the language. You get, does this ring a bell? So again, Prendergast was in some ways ahead of his time. Okay, let's move on. The second one, the oral method, also known as the direct, it had lots of different manifestations, but I'm looking at particularly this person as he's associated with the book called The Oral Method. And this man is Harold Palmer. And if you don't know about Harold Palmer, you should. He's the kind of ancestor of language teaching and applied linguistics. He wrote lots of books like this one, as well as grammars and methodology books, etc. And basically, he was trained in the direct method, the Berlitz kind of method. He taught at a Berlitz school in his youth, and he kind of developed this method. And it was very much based on sentence patterns again, pre-audiolingualism. But the sentences didn't have to make a lot of sense. It was enough to say, this is my head. That is your head. Is this my head? Is this your head? Again, difficult to think of a context, but is this my head or your head? Can you think of a context? Is this my head or my foot? Two people kind of like, anyway, and so on and so on and so on. This was a kind of thing that didn't matter that it wasn't authentic. What mattered was it embodied the patterns of the language, and it did it using high frequency vocabulary. And Palmer, we can laugh at the method maybe and say, it's not very authentic, but nevertheless, he had some amazing insights about language learning and proficiency. And when he was asked the question in 1925, nearly 100 years ago, he said, what is the most fundamental guiding principle to conversational proficiency? This is it. What is the most fundamental guiding principle to conversational proficiency? It is this. Now, what do you think it is? I hope this works, because hopefully you're sitting on the edge of your seats. What is the most fundamental guiding principle to fluency, let's say? It is this. It is memorize perfectly the largest number of common and useful word groups. Memorize. It's a memory. Language learning is all about memory. Sorry, but, you're going to have to remember a lot of stuff, and perfectly. You've got to get them right. And a large number of common, that is to say frequent and useful not words, not individual words, but word groups, what we will now call chunks. Yeah. So this is 1925. Now we can move 100 years on and we'll see people saying the same thing. In 2013, it is knowledge of conventional expressions more than anything. Conventional expressions, formulaic language, chunks, etc., whatever you want to call it, that gives speakers the means to escape from the one clause at a time constraint. And that is the key to native-like fluency. Yeah, that's exactly what Palmer was saying in 1925. So what are these conventional expressions? What are these word groups that Palmer was talking about? Well, how many of you were at Penny Ear's session yesterday? Penny was talking about exactly the same thing. And in fact, she gave some examples of some common chunks, some common collocations or phrases. I wonder if anybody can remember. Let's see. I'll give you a second if you can see if you've memorized them, because this is actually very good activity, is retrieving these from memory. So can anybody, she gave some examples of phrases, of chunks, and can you remember any examples? We'll see if anybody was paying attention. Angela. Yes, Audrey. Willy-nilly. By and large. Fantastic. My God, that's amazing. I hope Penny's watching. You see, this is what it's all about. This is what Palmer's saying. Memorize perfectly. It's not large and by. Yeah, and it's not nilly-willy. You've got to get it right. It's not square and fair. It's fair and square. So this is the thing. You can't get these things wrong. Memorized perfectly. There you go. So these are the ones that Penny gave you yesterday, just if you weren't here. But this is very good examples of very common word groups. Okay, the reading method. we better move on. The reading method, again, probably not very familiar to you. I don't know. 1930s in the States, they did a big study of modern language teaching in the schools, and they found that the results were very depressing. That children at college, at secondary school, high school in the States, learning French or Spanish or German or Portuguese, were not making very much progress. Now, how could they? In 2 years, at 1 or 2 hours a week, it was pathetic. They were certainly not fluent. And so they did a big report, and this guy called Coleman concluded that it was a waste of time trying to get these students to be able to speak fluently in the time that was available. And he said, let's just get realistic. Let's lower the bar and say it's impossible to achieve native-like fluency in 2 years at 1 or 2 hours a week, but you could learn to read in the language, and reading may be a step in the right direction. So that's why it's called the reading method. And so this is how he put it. The ultimate objective of the curriculum for modern language should be the ability to read the foreign language with moderate ease and with enjoyment for recreative and vocational purposes. And this idea was picked up, the idea that reading was a good, it's not everything, but it's a great start. It's pragmatic, it's realistic. Michael West, who was, again, in the generation of people like Palmer, was a great British applied linguist, avant la lettre. He wrote a book, Learning to Read in a Foreign Language, and he concluded in 1937, learning to read a language before learning to speak has the advantage that when the pupil begins to speak, he or she possesses some general idea of the form of the language and some sense of right or wrong idiom. In other words, the experience of reading gives you a sense of the language, of what is idiomatic, etc. You're well prepared from reading. I might add reading and listening too. Those days, of course, listening in the class was less easily implemented. Now, does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? I don't think it does, because if anybody know Stephen Krashen, hands up. Anybody heard of Stephen Krashen? Of course you have. Stephen Krashen's been banging on about this as if he had discovered the idea that reading and listening, comprehensible input is all you need, at least to gain a foothold into the language. He said in 2004, reading is a powerful means of developing reading comprehension, obviously, writing style, it impacts on writing, vocabulary, you can learn quite a lot of vocabulary from reading, but not as much as perhaps some people would claim, as Penny said yesterday, grammar and spelling. In addition, evidence shows that it is pleasant. Reading is pleasant. You can read for pleasure, promotes cognitive development, and lowers writing apprehension. Reading is good for you. It may not be all there is to a language, but okay, let's move on. CLL. Any ideas of what CLL stands for? This is not the communicative approach. This is not CLT. CLL. That's one of the, remember I showed you a picture of Suggestipedia, then I showed you a picture of TPR. Well, this is the kind of same generation of methods. And CLL stands for, yes, Natalia. Wow, you're so on top of things. Community language learning. Community, not communicative. Community language learning. Thank you, Natalia. And it goes like this. Now, this is a great little method, but it's a bit based on groups. The teacher is outside the group. The teacher is that black kind of rhomboid outside. The students are facing each other. They have a conversation. They generate the conversation. They talk about whatever they want. When they don't know what to say, they ask the teacher in their first language. They say to the teacher in Portuguese or Spanish or French, whatever, how do you say? How do you say, what did you do in the weekend? The teacher says, este fin de semana. And the student repeats it, and then they record that repetition. And then another student answers, same thing. How do you say? How do you say? And they build up this conversation, which they then is played back, transcribed, and then various features of the language are identified. So it's a kind of, it works with small groups. I've done it with teenagers in Spain as an activity. It's much easier now with mobile phones than it was with the tape recorder in the middle of the room. This is the kind of thing. This is generated by a group of women in Spain, 3 of them did an activity, and it goes like this. One of them says, Emma, where are you going tonight? Tonight I'm going to have supper out. Where are you going to have supper? I don't know. I'm being taken out. You see, now this is language that the teacher has fed in. It's their content, but the language has been tidied up for them by the teacher. And then it's recorded and you get the transcript and it looks really good. Who are you going with? I'm going with a guy, but he isn't my boyfriend. And where is your boyfriend? Do you mean now? No, not now. Where will he be this evening? He's going to play water polo. Water polo, very interesting. Is your boyfriend hunky? Yes, he's very hunky. Now, hunky is not a word that students would come up with. That came from the teacher, obviously. So what happens is the students are collaborating to produce the language about what they want to talk about. And it's sort of it's echoed in this comment by Michael Breen. The language I learn in the classroom is a communal product derived through a jointly constructed process. It doesn't come from outside. It doesn't come from the textbook necessarily. It doesn't come from the internet. It's something that we construct together. And it's interesting, actually, when you look at this book by Curran about counseling learning or community language learning, he did. I only discovered this the other day, that he did have this option that you could use a phone. You could be outside the class. In 1983, you could be in another room. The teacher could be in another room communicating with the teachers, with the students on their phone. So this seems to me to suggest ways of doing this online. I just throw that out. Crazy English. This is a man called Li Yang, Chinese, who developed this method to compensate for the fact that when he was learning English, he was incredibly shy. So he said the only way to overcome shyness is going crazy. So he developed this method where he had whole stadiums of people repeating sentences like, I do not feel ashamed of my English. And it became so massively popular that he became a national hero. And it's not dissimilar for another man who in the 1970s, called John Racias, working in the States, developed a method where he dressed up, he clowned, he threw things at the students. If they made mistakes, he'd break an egg on their head. He did all sorts of crazy things, and he kept doing them until his recent death. Now, what's going on here? Why were these methods very popular? Because they were crazy, because they disinhibited the learners. And this was Li Yang says, the Chinese says, you have to make a lot of mistakes. Yeah, you're learning a language. You have to make a lot of mistakes. You have to be laughed at by a lot of people. But that doesn't matter, because your future is totally different from other people's futures. Do what you like. Doesn't matter. Be laughed at. Who cares? That's what's involved in learning a language. John Racias said a similar thing. Have the courage to be bad, to make mistakes, but speak. And I think there's something in that. Number 6, task-based language teaching. We're getting back to more serious methods here. Those of you, again, who are familiar with the history of, we looked at a picture representing task-based learning, the history of the communicative approach will know that it sort of began life as task-based language teaching, with students doing tasks with no input necessarily from the teacher, but feedback on the tasks. And this is diagramized, it was a diagram in 1979 by Chris Brumford, showing the 2 different kinds of methodologies. The current methodology of the time, which was you present some grammar, you drill it, you practice it, you present some more, you drill it, you practice it, a bit like audiolingualism. The task-based or the strong communicative approach said, no, let's start with the production stage. Yeah, let's start with communication. Communicate as much as possible, and then the teacher presents language that is necessary to improve the communication, drill it if necessary, go back, repeat the task. That's the task cycle. And it makes a lot of sense, because if communication is the aim, then maybe communication should be the starting point. And that's exactly what Dick Allwright said, one of the architects of the communicative approach. If communication is the aim, then it should be the major element in the process. And if you, again, to spell that out a bit, this is a slightly longish quote, but I like it for obvious reasons. And again, I'm doing the same thing. A presentation approach is based on the idea that there's something the learners don't know. They don't know the present perfect continuous. Okay, so I better teach it to them. It's so important. Okay, so they don't know something, and I'm going to fill the holes in their knowledge. It's kind of a deficit model of teaching. That's the PPP, the traditional presentation. Today we're going to do the present perfect continuous because you don't know it, and I do because I'm the teacher. Now, a task-based approach, on the other hand, starts from the assumption that there is something the learners can do in language, in our language, maybe their first language, but they probably could do it a little bit in their second language. And it attempts to empower them with the means to do this more effectively. There's something you can do. Everybody can tell a story. Everybody can tell a joke. Everybody can complain. Everybody can make a request. Not very well, but if you start with telling stories, if you start with making requests, if you start with complaining, and then the teacher will tidy it up for you. That's the idea. So a task-based approach is more empowering in theory than a presentation-based approach. That's the theory. Okay, so how many methods is that? I think we've done 6, and I said I'd do 7, and we're running out of time. So what's the 7th method? Oh, this is the cheesy bit. It's your method. You are the architect, you are the designer of your own method. Every teacher teaches according to their own beliefs, values, experience, and responds to their learners appropriately in the context, their institutional context, their cultural context, their political context, or whatever. We craft our own methodology. That's why there's no one method, because there's so many different teachers. Every teacher has their own method. And that method that you have developed is the best method. It may be a kind of mix and match of various bits and pieces of other methods. It doesn't matter. That's what's called eclecticism. Hopefully it's principled eclecticism, though, that another the activities that you're choosing are based on some kind of intuitions, if you like, or explicit theory of learning. As Diane Larson Freeman said in one of the books I showed you, Eclecticism, she says, when teachers pick and choose from among methods to create their own blend, their practice is said to be eclectic. Electric, but eclectic. But she goes on to say, remember, though, that methods should be coherent combinations of techniques. They should make sense. Thus, teachers who have a consistent philosophy and pick in accordance with it, you have a theory, and you choose your activities in accordance with your theory, they are practicing principled eclecticism. So let's just summarize then. These are the 7 methods. And as I said before, there's no one method. Your method is the one that is for you personally the most plausible. And this echoes Prabhu's wonderful article written in 1990 when he said there is no best method. Why? He says perhaps the best method varies from one teacher to another, but only in the sense that it is best for each teacher to operate with his or her own sense of plausibility. What he's saying is if you believe it, if it's plausible, that's what guides your choices. And that plausibility will come from your experience, from understanding your context, from listening to your students, as well as your teacher training, what you read, and attending wonderful Cambridge days like this. So let's just summarize. Why do I like the 7 methods that I've just outlined? Remember Prendergast's mastery system? Well, I like that because of the manipulation of formal elements that you get in substitution tables or on some apps. It may not be all of language learning. In fact, it's not all of language learning, but it's part of language learning. The oral method, remember that's Harold Palmer. Is this my head? Is that your head? But the memorization of chunks, what he realized in 1925 was key. That's why I like the oral method. The reading method, I like it because it's realistic. You can't learn to speak, as I say, overnight, but you could learn to read quite well in a period of 2 years or so. And because comprehensible input, as Krashen says, is, if not the only element involved in second language learning, it's a very important element. Community language learning, the students sitting around creating their own dialogues. The notion that learning is collaborative, it's co-constructive, very, very important. Crazy English, yeah, I mean, it was popular. Why? Stress reduction, lowering inhibitions. Task-based language teaching, you know, it's meaning driven. It's driven by communication, by the learner's own meanings. It's empowering. It has to be better than being fed somebody else's meanings. And your method is the best because it's sensitive to your context and it gives you a sense of plausibility. And I'll just finish with one more. Oh, there's that book again. Well, I've just talked about 7 methods. There's another 23 in this book, and that doesn't exhaust by any means all the different methods that have been suggested over the years. But I've tried to summarize in that book what I think are the ones that have perhaps got more to say. And there's no method that is completely without some kind of value if some learners have learned something somewhere from it. So don't knock things like Crazy English, for example. And Jane Spiro, last quote, but basically it's all about you, because the critical factor in success is the commitment and belief of the teacher in the methods he or she is using. It's your belief in the method, because if you believe it, the students will. If you're convinced, the students will be on side. And then combined with continuing reflection as to whether these methods are making a positive difference. You can't just rest on your laurels. You've got to keep thinking. And I think, again, each teacher's own method is evolving. It's dynamic. It's never the same. And hopefully you're going to go away and next week be trying out the little changes that you could be doing to your own particular methods. So I'm going to throw it open now to some questions. We've got approximately 12 minutes.
Yes, we have a lot of questions to you, Scott. Thank you very much for such an iron lecture. Actually, we have even more questions than we can handle it, but let's go quickly to that. Rodrigo da Silva asks, does grammar translation method gives real beginners to some knowledge of the language, but acquiring intermediate or advanced level productive skill is unlikely?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't talk about the grammar translation because, I mean, we're all kind of familiar with it, and it's still very much the default setting for a lot of contexts. And, you know, I mean, I have no problem with grammar, but I think you're absolutely right that it's limited. There's a point where, I think this is what people realized. This is why the direct method was kind of designed in the late 19th century, because people have been like, grammar translation was fine for reading and writing perhaps, but it was not very good for speaking. And so they said, well, let's just throw out all that stuff and just start with speaking and direct with a no translation, because translation is bad for you, and it entrenches bad habits. Well, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think the grammar translation could be redesigned to bring it into line with some of these communicative principles that we've been talking about. So in combination with kind of fluency activities, I see no problem with the grammar translation. And you can quote me.
I love that one. Next question. Rodrigo Jorge Miguel da Silva asks, in which classroom context levels is Dogma most likely to be successful?
Dogma. Now, I didn't mention the D word. In fact, if you look at the book, you'll find I sneaked in a chapter on Dogma / Teaching Unplugged. So I invite you to buy the book and to read about it's published by Cambridge, of course.
I love you.
The context in which is most successful, you'd be surprised how many people have used Dogma techniques in contexts which would not necessarily be conducive to it. So I'll pass on that because I don't want to be seen to be advertising my own method. I'll just advertise the book.
Yeah, no, there is someone also on chat already. Where I can buy the book? Can we buy the book? So later the people on chat will say to you. Elena D'Alessandro asks, is it fair to say we should use all the tools and positive practices to each method, approach, technique to motivate learners and have them achieve their learning goals?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we could use all the tools and positive practice for each method. I mean, as I say, I've collected 30, and there's probably another 70, if not more, in the last century. I think we should look at all the tools and positive practices, and we should try to identify which ones would be appropriate in our particular context and try them out. And sometimes you'll be surprised that things that you wouldn't think, oh, this won't work with these learners, you'll be surprised. Of course, we're also talking about a change, a major change, which nobody's asked about yet, which is which of these methods would work best online, since most of us, or many of us, are teaching online. And that's another question that I don't address, in fact, in the book. But, well, I do actually, in this, there's a chapter on, there is a chapter actually on things like programmed instruction and some of these apps, online poly, etc. So, but you'd have to adapt some of these procedures. Some of them just wouldn't work, like community language learning with the students constructing a conversation in a group. I think that could work in a breakout room, for example, in Zoom, where they constructed the conversation, they recorded it, and then they performed it to the rest of the class, and then it's transcribed. I mean, I think that would be an interesting line to follow, but I don't have any immediate answers on that question, which is not one that you asked, but it's one that I anticipated.
Our next question is Clarice Piroli asks, why the students are stuck by a methodology rather than being focused on their own results?
Yeah, I don't think it's students who are stuck by methodology so much as teachers who get stuck by methodology. I mean, I think learners are amazingly adaptive as long as they understand, as I said before, as long as the teacher is enthusiastic about the method. And I think there's a thing called the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect is a authenticated response to experimentation that researchers have noticed. When people know that they're being experimented on, they perform to the limits of their competence. So if you say to your class, I'm going to do an experiment with you, I'm going to do a method, this one lesson, which is totally different from what we've been doing traditionally. It may be that I'm not going to speak whatsoever, like the silent way, and I'm just going to manipulate things, and you're going to tell me what I'm trying to say. Now, the students will be very engaged, theoretically, because of this thing called the Hawthorne effect, the idea that they're being experimented on. And particularly if they can then talk about it, and you say, well, what did you like about that? What wouldn't you like? What would you like? Would you like to repeat this kind of thing? I think that's where the question about the dogma approach needs to be qualified and say, yes, it's not going to work in every context unless you persuade the students that this is something worth doing. And once you do that and try something out with them, you'll be surprised that, the students say, I quite like this. It's a chance to, express our own meanings. So I think, students are actually quite adaptable.
Our next question comes from Argentina, Micaela Soledad Lizondo. What happens if there is no method? Is it possible?
Well, I mean, you could say there's no method in this context where there's no rigid. Remember the definition of David Noonan when I started with a single set of procedures. So you may be in an institution where teachers have more freedom to choose their own procedures. What I think is the case in many contexts now, and I didn't mention this, but there's that there is no method because the course book is the method. Yeah, so there's an institutionalized or institutional mandated course book that everybody uses, or a curriculum or a syllabus or a set of lesson plans that everybody uses in the institution. And I know this happens a lot, where every teacher has to teach that particular lesson on that particular day. So the whole system is standardized. We say there's no method there, but there is a course book or there's a syllabus or there's a curriculum which is kind of imposed. But that in a sense is the method. It becomes the method.
Perfect, thank you. Marcelo from Roraima, Boa Vista asks, would it be possible to use the same method both for one-on-one lessons and group classes?
Oh, good question. I mean, one-to-one lessons, some of these methods work really well. In fact, they're actually better in one-to-one situations like community language learning, or where, you know, you say to the learner, what is it you want to say? You know, what do you need to say? Why are you here? You know, what is this for professional reasons? In which case, was it academic reason? You tell me what you want to say, and I'll put the words into your mouth, and then you tell me again. That kind of thing. That will work well. There are other things that would work less. Like communicative approach, where, you know, there's meant to be interaction, pairs work, information gap, etc. It's difficult to set that up with a teacher all the time. Not impossible. So yeah, I mean, I think that's that's one of the reasons why there's no one method, because of these different kinds of situations which people are teaching in. One-to-one, groups, large groups, online, etc. So, you know, you have to pick and choose according to those particular constraints, and then use those constraints to your advantage. You know, the one-to-one is a fantastic way to learn a language if people are committed to it and can afford it.
Our last questions come from Cynthia Firmino, São Paulo. Can we say that the best method depends on the age and something the learner's objectives of learning?
Absolutely. So that's another factor, another contextual factor that you need to take into account. Certain things will, that's right, grammar translation never works for 5-year-olds, because they can't get their heads around the kinds of concepts, the grammatical concepts, like, you know, the present perfect continuous, etc. So whereas the direct method works much better for 5-year-olds, because it's just about repeating and repeating. So yes, absolutely. So the age, the learner's objectives, the learner's previous educational experience, what they're used to, you can't kind of ignore that. Again, so this is where you need to kind of consult with them and experiment with them and generally get them on side before you start to impose your own method.
Oh, thank you very much, Scott. Any final words, any final thoughts you want to leave us?
Yes, well, I mean, it's been wonderful being with you virtually, and I'd like just to thank Cambridge, Brazil, and you, Renata, and Gabriela, and the whole team for setting this up in such a wonderful professional way, and for attracting such a huge audience, and for making sure that the technology worked so well. So thank you very much, sincerely, all of you in Cambridge, all of you who have participated, thank you. And I hope that there's something for you in this talk that you can take away and integrate into your future practice.
I'm sure people are already excited for the next Monday when the videos are going to be available for them to see it again. Thank you very much for your participation, Scott. And now we'll follow the next activity of Cambridge Day 2020. But before we have our small break, I must remind you, every year during Cambridge Day events, we request participants a donation of 1 kilo of food for local assistance organizations. In 2020, it couldn't be different. This year, we are asking participants and partners to contribute with Ação pela Cidadania, a renowned NGO with more than 20 years of action against hunger and poverty in Brazil. It's easy for you to donate. Just use the QR code that appears on your screen now. Nowadays, our help is more important than ever. We now will have a short break and we'll be back soon. So go scratch, grab a glass of water, and I'll be waiting for you.